Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 27th of September 2017, a little bit after 1 o'clock. Apologies for those slight delay there. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish, with me in the studio, Mike Robinson, and of course we're joined today by Alex Thompson, Eastern Approaches, and Alex reporting from the Netherlands. But we're starting overseas.
Afghanistan, and Jens Stoltenberg and James Mattis arrived in Kabul this morning to the sound of rockets landing at the international airport. Initially, there were no claims for responsibility for this, but then the Taliban claimed that Mattis was the target and that they had done it. Shortly after that, Islamic State said that they had fired rockets at the airport. So apparently everybody is firing rockets at the airport in Kabul today. Well, they were there. NATO and Afghanistan. Jens Stoltenberg gave a keynote presentation with General Mattis. He renewed his commitment to bringing peace and stability to Afghanistan, and that was represented by his welcome at the airport this morning. He said, that half of the troops that are there from foreign lands are US troops. The rest are from the European Union and other NATO members. He said that, there's still too much violence, still too much corruption in Afghanistan, but not enough drugs. He didn't say that, of course. But what was spectacular about every statement that has been made about Afghanistan in the last 2 days has not used the D word. We're not allowed to use the D word. Drugs, Afghanistan, this is not the problem. And that was highlighted yesterday by Jonathan Allen, who's the Deputy Permanent Representative to the United Nations, who was making comment in the United Nations about bringing extra stability to Afghanistan. And he said, as has been made clear, we simply cannot afford to lose sight of Afghanistan. Despite years of progress, Afghanistan continues to face tough security and development challenges, and the human cost after years of fighting, years of violence, only continues to grow. So our work is not done. He said the US and the UK are close partners in Afghanistan, so we welcome the US's long-term commitment to the people and government there, despite the challenges which we've heard a lot about today. This was in the United Nations yesterday. We agree that it is important that we continue to provide support in these issues such as security, development and governance. This is crucial to building a stable Afghan state and reducing the terrorist threat to us all. It's in all our interests that Afghanistan becomes safer and more prosperous. That's why we announced our own troop increase back in June and confirmed development support of up to $1 billion in 2020. So the UK government pumping $1 billion into Afghanistan. We're sending more troops. I think we have about 1,000 troops there at the moment. They're there to apparently train the local security forces on how to deal with the Taliban and ISIS. They were doing a fantastic job of that this morning. But of course, as I say, nobody mentioning this image from the 2017 World Drugs Report. The green dots are where the most drug production is taking place, and most drug production remains in the areas that historically have been controlled, at least since the turn of the century, have been controlled by the British, because this drugs trade, City of London business, really. And so Helmand province and the provinces around Helmand, the centre of the drugs trade, still in Afghanistan. I don't believe for 1 second that any of these people are the slightest bit interested, Brian, in stability, security, peace for Afghanistan. They're only interested in those green dots.
Well, we've got I'll say the possibility that they're interested in those green dots, keep the drugs flowing. But of course, the other thing that's happening here is that we've got this big bogeyman of international terrorism. The American troops are in there, the British troops are in, European. I think it's a total of 39 countries have got troops in Afghanistan. So this is helping to create the world military fighting a created threat. And somebody in the chat box has said, well, of course, if they want to bring peace to Afghanistan, they should simply get the troops out and let the country go back to ruling itself. Unlikely that's going to happen.
Alex, let's bring you in at this point. Any thoughts?
I think the Germans, Mike, are the first major contributors to the mission. It's really the successor to ISAF, isn't it? The 15, 17-year continuation. The Germans are the first major contributors, both financially and in terms of manpower, to ask themselves, as Björn Höcke did of Alternative für Deutschland before the election, why are we there? And you saw the subtitles if you watched my recent appearance where we showed you this. He said they're there ultimately for Uncle Sam. In German, he said Big Brother. But of course, he means Uncle Sam. German politicians won't openly mention America or Israel when they're talking about these things, but we know who they're talking about. I've seen this evidence of this myself. I have to watch my wording, but when I was still on the inside, it did surprise me how jolly quickly, after a raid by the Afghan National Army, supported by, should we say, the sharp end of the West, just a few hours later, the drug-producing stations in Helmand province, Kandahar and so on, were cooking again, producing their drugs, their refined heroin for export. I remember a time just after 9/11 when the Russians, and this is openly acknowledged, were still in the lead in producing the heroin traffic. There was all kinds of songs and dances from NATO about how these Russian troop transports going out to Turkmenistan and Moscow were exfiltrating heroin. All of a sudden, we took over. That's, shall we say, peacekeeping business in Afghanistan, and NATO's been remarkably quiet since about the heroin trade.
Absolutely, not just NATO, but governments as well. As I say, drugs not mentioned once in any of the press statements or any of the press releases or any of the United Nations statements. Okay, let's come on to back to the UK then. And Alex, this is from the Daily Post. It's come from a couple of weeks ago. We've tried to get this in over the last couple of weeks and haven't managed, but I think it's worth covering. So, justice system in Wales to be reviewed to suit Welsh needs. And your point here is that the English or the British common law is not common anymore.
Correct. The thing for foreign viewers to realise, or perhaps some of our British ones as well, is that the common law is as much Welsh, if not more Welsh, than it is English. I talked about this at Winchester last year. It was the Brythonic Celts, the early Welsh, who codified the common law or formulated it. And Wales has, to this day, seen the most determined action in the British Isles, with the possible exception of the Republic of Ireland. Wales has been the centre of where they've been really keen to reinstate the common law. There's a common law court with a North and South Wales branch. They're quite active. And now Wales is splitting off because it's basically got the English language legal system. Okay, Welsh language is increasing in the courts, but basically it's English law in a smaller form. And as with other devolved jurisdictions, it's an excellent opportunity to commercialise and civil lawify the common law. So Lord John Thomas, the aptly named perhaps Lord John Thomas of Cwmgïedd, who's the top dog at the moment, the Lord Chief Justice of England and Wales, has in many speeches recently at the Legal Wales Conference, Cymru Gyfraith and so on, he said Wales is an ideal opportunity to commercialise ourselves and flog ourselves as basically an arbitration court. So a lot of this is going on. Wales is going to be at the sharp end of civil lawizing, Europeanising our common law and selling it to the highest bidder, I'm afraid.
Well, one of the highest bidders seems to be Russia. This is the Law Society, and they're pushing English Law Week 2017. It's entitled "The Law, a Noble Profession or a Just Business." Well, this is an annual event with Russian legal system. It alternates year on year with its twin event, which is called Russia Law Week, and that takes place in London. This year's conference, as I say, a noble profession or a just business, and for the first time it's taking place in Moscow, two Russian cities, Moscow and St. Petersburg, and they're covering such things as recent English judgments involving Russian and CIS parties, case studies of a claim in England involving Russian parties, international arbitration, competition law issues involving Brexit and EU regulations, business as usual, they call it, current models and trends in the organisation of law. They're talking about recovering assets through bankruptcy and liquidation, keeping the profession noble in the current regulatory framework. Is it fit for purpose? And so there's nothing there about the common law. There's nothing there about English law. In fact, it's all about commercial law. It's all about bankruptcy and English law becoming an attractive place for Russian people to bring lawsuits. They're setting out their shop store, it seems.
Yes, Mike, this is pretty complicated stuff because international law has several branches and they've actually got names like international private law, for example, and international public law. Well, international private law is basically where there are international aspects to a family dispute, such as child custody or divorce. Or assets going to part of the family. And all of these are very attractive to Russian oligarchs and other well-to-do Russians who have come to London. And they came there for common law reasons in the early 2000s, security of investment, security of private property, which they didn't have in the post-Yeltsin years in Russia. But I'm afraid that a lot of these companies are actually shells for British companies. The Russians have got wise to some of this, and a lot of this bad money has sloshed back into London. It was city money in the first place, and New York money, and there it's just that the people fronting up to the judge have got Slavic surnames that obscures it. But basically, it's a way of privatizing some of the West's own business, and that we're doing this to ourselves essentially. But a lot of if people are aware of Eugene Lukyanenko, for example, a Russian father in Medway in Kent. And his custody battle for his son on Facebook, very active. A lot of these Russians are cute to this now, and they've realised that the English are offering them no security of law in the current system.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, well, something else which isn't being offered by the current system, it seems increasingly, is the right to life. And we know that following the Parsons Green situation, there were suggestions that SAS with troops with undercover SAS troops with a shoot-to-kill policy would be sitting on the underground. Well, today we seem to have more evidence of the police getting a bit trigger happy in this country. Now, for foreign viewers and listeners, of course, Britain traditionally in a common law jurisdiction has had an unarmed police force. The police have not, it hasn't been a requirement for them to be armed. They seem to have done a very good job over the years as a general rule without carrying guns around. But suddenly in the last 10, 15 years, we seem to be carrying guns as a matter of course. And Brian, we know that on the road from Plymouth to Bristol and further north, which is mainly the M5, police are running around with multiple weapons in their cars, and today they seem to have been used. I'm not sure whether the person who's been shot by the police is alive or dead. He was being treated at the scene. But people describing the police as having effectively run this guy off the road and then shot through the passenger window up to 10 times.
10 times. So
yes.
that's 10 times is not controlled, because either that's a short automatic burst, which seems remarkable in the circumstances.
I think actually it was multiple shooters.
Oh, multiple shooters.
Yes.
Right.
It wasn't sufficient for one policeman to be armed. We need multiple police armed.
And I know we don't know a lot about this incident at the moment, but from what we have heard, I believe that it doesn't appear any sort of warning was given by the police.
No
suggestion. They backed
of
off the car and then opened fire.
Yeah.
Well, before we bring Alex in again, I just wanted to bring this gentleman back up on screen. This is Sergeant Harry Tangy from Devon and Cornwall Police. No suggestion that he was involved in this incident whatsoever. But our simple point is that this man, as one of Devon and Cornwall's armed police constables, seems to be incredibly gung-ho with his attitude to weapons. And if we go from his Twitter page into this one, which is some of his images of himself, what we were pointing out in a recent programme with Ian Crane, and we've also talked about it on the UK Column News, is that you get the impression that policemen, presumably policewomen as well, who volunteer for the armed section of the police, are increasingly gung-ho. You almost sense they've got toys and they want to play with those toys. And what I mean by the toys are the automatic weapons. So here is an image by a Devon and Cornwall armed police officer. What do I get out of it? This man loves the role. I think that he and other police officers, they've been told, of course, that arms are the last resort. I think some of them are itching to use these weapons. I'm probably being unkind, Alex. You're there in Holland, and of course, Dutch police have been armed for many years.
Well, I was just going to ask Alex. Actually, what happens when you ask if you've got a police force which is generally unarmed, and you ask for volunteers for an armed section? What type of people are going to volunteer for that?
Well, there's a book that will answer that question. It was a book which had to be burned twice because the Polish secret police came to the door. And on its third rewrite, it managed to get published in the West. It's called, if I can remember the title now, Political Ponerology. Poneros is the Greek for evil. So it's the first scientific study of evil and psychopathy by a Pole called Łukaszewski. And he identifies this. He lost his statistics in the 2 times he had to burn the manuscript. But there was a group of them in Poland that were actually working out what kind of thugs floated to the top in a system that promoted violence. Very different from a mass armed constabulary like anywhere in the United States, or in fact in most countries in the world, barring the likes of Iceland and Japan and so on. If you've got a universal armed constabulary like in the Netherlands, then people come along. Most of the Dutch police men and women never have to draw their service revolver during their working lives. But all of a sudden, with Police Scotland, and I think down in Devon and Cornwall, you're also one of these leading cutting-edge forces now for arming. They seem to go straight up to Heckler and Koch G7s and G8s and so on. Same with some of the American highway patrols pointing AR-15s. You don't get on the European continent, not even in wild countries like Russia. It's a disciplined draw of the service revolver, and of course, as long as you stay inside the car, you're not going to be a threat to shoot someone outside it unless you roll the windows down. So those are the protocols the continent has. Here we seem to have just gung-ho. I'm sorry to say, the body's not yet cold. It seems heartless to say it, but this is very bad stuff. And I think that the kernel of violence that's in Devon and Cornwall police seems to be spreading, because along with this Heart of the Southwest plan you have for Devon and Somerset, there does seem to be a move now for Devon and Cornwall to merge with Dorset police, doesn't there?
Well, that is absolutely correct. So we're seeing the creation of regionalised police forces, and of course many people would say, well, that was planned many years ago, as UK was carved into the EU regions.
Yes, I believe somebody in the chat box has said that the person that was shot has actually died. So this, I guess the IPCC will be involved straight away. There'll be an investigation. I'm sure it'll be up to their usual standards.
A cover-up.
Yes. Now, as we know, the Interpol General Assembly is going on at the moment in China. Interpol now has 192 member countries because the General Assembly has voted to admit the State of Palestine and the Solomon Islands as 2 new member countries. So each application was approved by more than 2/3 majority vote at Interpol's General Assembly. So that's good news. There's the press release. The resolution introduces guidelines and procedures to achieve transparency, consistency and clarity, and assist countries in preparing their requests for membership. A requesting country will also need to confirm that it meets conditions for statehood and that it is studied, understood and will abide by Interpol's constitution. So is this, Alex, just briefly, is this another recognition by an international body that Palestine is actually a state?
Oh, there's been a whole spate of that recently. Palestine is kind of over the crest now. Kosovo is still sort of trying to trail up the rankings of international recognitions, Abkhazia and South Ossetia down below, but they triggered each other. Putin did say that, if you recognize Kosovo in the west, we'll recognize Abkhazia in the east. Palestine's gone beyond that. Russia's recognized it since '88, if I'm not mistaken, and they do seem to have got the EU and UK level recognition now as well.
Can I just come in there briefly, Mike? I couldn't remember off the top of my head, so I've just done a little research, and 195 countries in the world. So we've now got a unified worldwide police force under Interpol arrangement.
This is absolutely what they were hoping to achieve, is global policing governance.
Yeah. So we can see the military drive towards the worldwide military forces on joint operations. The police are very nearly there.
Yes, and in fact, Interpol needs to be watched quite closely because they have, I can't remember exactly the term for it, it involves the word red, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but they have a similar type of instrument to the European arrest warrant. Now, at this point in time, its equivalent is not a binding document. So if a country sends a request to Interpol for somebody to be intercepted that's in a foreign land, it's not a binding thing at this point in time, but that's got to be something that's on the cards. Yes. Right, Edward Heath again. This is the FOIA Centre. This is the Freedom of Information Act Centre, the FOIA Centre. Apparently this organisation set up 10 years ago or so. It is an organisation which makes freedom of information requests on behalf of other media organisations and so on. And this article here, Edward Heath, police delayed Conifer report to avoid overshadowing Tory conference, is by Mark Watts, who used to write for, or in fact was editor-in-chief for Exaro, the now defunct media organisation that was mainly focusing on child abuse issues. And what he's saying here is that police, Mike Veal and Wiltshire Police, delayed publishing a report into their investigation of Edward Heath over child sexual abuse in order to avoid what he describes as overshadowing the Conservative Party conference. So they've now decided they're going to publish this report on the 5th of October, which I think is the day after the conference finishes. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Mike Veal in an incredibly difficult position because, of course, the establishment has been out to get him from the start. Anecdotal evidence at least says that even the Attorney General took the trouble to speak to him and, inverted commas, warn him off. We've seen people raising or causing trouble in the House of Lords, asking why he's doing this investigation, and we've had the whole series of hit articles in the Telegraph and the Times and the Guardian over recent months. So they're out to get Mike Veal, which is surprising because if Ted Heath is totally innocent, I don't know what they're worried about. But think of it from Mike Veal's point of view. If he produces his report before the conference, they say, you've just produced this report in order to attack the Tory party, in order to make a political statement. So I personally think he had to leave it till after the Tory conference so that he could not be accused of trying to spin what was going to happen at that conference.
It's clear that from this article, at least, that what Mike Veal has is pretty significant. A number of people commenting to the journalist here. One source saying, "I've seen successful prosecutions on a lot less than Mike Veal has already got." On this issue now, of course, Edward Heath dead, so he can't be prosecuted. But there must be other people associated with this as well.
I have heard there are other people implicated in this already, and it's not surprising. But in this particular article, Mike, it does say it's understood that there are more than 30 witnesses. This is credible witnesses. So it's not just that we've got one or two people. The police have been into this long enough, and if this article is to be believed, we're talking circa 30 different people. So there is more here. I think the panic and the articles we're seeing in the national press, Sunday Times particularly unpleasant on this because of course they attempted to smear Mike Veal using all of the good work of Robert Greene. They're very frightened people.
Yes, and Alex, tomorrow Wilfred Wong is on Blog Talk Radio.
I just wanted to plug this to viewers. The link's down below, but you can also find it easily enough by searching for Wilfred Wong Andy Peacher or Wilfred Wong Blog Talk Radio. But he's due to be on tomorrow 5 p.m. British time, and this should be quite a revelation because Wilfred is, I'm sure you'll agree, if you've seen him, and he's been on UK Column before, probably the expert now on satanic ritual abuse in its British context and particularly in its Scottish context.
Okay. Alex, let's move back across onto the continent and a Flemish rally. What's going on here?
What you're seeing on screen is from Red Ice TV, and if you go to their YouTube and sort the videos by latest, you will see the reportage we have on screen here and also the separate speeches that we're going to refer to. Now, this developed out of a pilgrimage called the Yser Bedevaart. Now, Yser is the name of a river near Ypres, which saw some of the heaviest fighting in the First World War. And this was the centennial edition because it commemorates a 1917 event where two of the proto-Flemish nationalists in the Belgian soldiery died in each other's arms in the field where they have the commemoration. And so as a result, the pilgrimage that was developed every year had a Roman Catholic mass to open it, and it became a restatement of the Flemish soldiers' demands of 1917, which was autonomy, the peace of God, and no war again. A very worthy thing. But as a result of being, should we say, infiltrated by people with other organisational aims, part of them split off and formed this current organisation, the Yser Waken, which preserves the original aims of Flemish independence, and they're very realistic about the EU, and you'll see about a number of financial aspects as well. So here is some reportage used by permission from Red Ice TV's coverage. This is 3¼ minutes of very interesting talk with, first of all, a youth organizer and then a priest, Father Eric Jakeman.
We want, of course, to be Flemish nationalists, but we don't want the children already to have a label of a political party on them. These young people are coming together and they're forming bonds for life who work together, the entire organization, for life. To be honest, I am finally a dissident in the Catholic Church. But because in the Catholic Church there's a big problem. There has been an infiltration by secret societies who want to the world government and install world tyranny, and they must control the Catholic Church. They have the infiltrated church, but because the church has a divine promise to survive, it is, between brackets, the only entity in the universe that has a divine promise of survival. I am faithful to the roots of the Catholic Church, and so I'm in conflict with the infiltrators who focus the top of the church.
So how do you think the current church leadership and the Pope would look at events, nationalist events like the IJzerwake, which for our viewers, IJzerwake translates to Iron Mass or Wake of Iron. It is a church service remembering soldiers.
Yes. It is a church service, but it is referring to the soldiers who died in the First World War, Flemish soldiers who wanted to continue their culture and their language and their faith, and they were thinking about what are we fighting for, because we are fighting against the Germans, but for the Belgian Republic, but the Belgian Republic is Freemason. In our own country, we claim the right to speak our own language, to live our own culture, and to keep our own faith, because the governments opened the frontiers. So it is our own leadership that is the cause of the problem, not the Islam. The Islamists, not themselves. Yes. But they have been invited. They have been invited to come here, and they are paid, and they have a good life here, and therefore they are here. So I don't blame them as on that aspect, but the people who are really guilty is our own government, yes. And our government is tired by forces behind the curtains, because the government has, as you know, unpayable debt to the banks, yeah. And so the bankers are ruling the world. And the bankers are these same people who want to install their government all over the world, and therefore they want to control the church, and they want the Islam to come in our countries to destroy Christianity.
So there we go. That's a more perspicacious clergyman than I think I've ever heard before, and I
Alex, an amazing discussion, amazing interview with those people. Let me bring in this gentleman before we go into this a bit more. This is Jon van Malderen, former chairman of Pro Flandria. I've just taken some screenshots of what he actually said with the translation, but as it is, Flanders has denigrated into Belgium's intravenous drip, a bruise on the face of Europe. He goes on, that is why it's our solemn duty in this hour of need to emulate the example set with the States General of the Netherlands in their 1581 Act of Abjuration. And he goes on, by revoking our confidence in this country and its ruler, Flanders forsakes you, you king, who have never cared a whit for Flanders no more than your forefathers ever did. This is very strong stuff of people starting to actually put the spotlight on who has caused the circumstance. And I'm going to say, coming back to the priest speaking there when he said it's our governments that have caused the problem, I did on two occasions actually. I was invited to speak at a BMP meeting. It was up in the Midlands. One of the key issues was immigration, and I simply asked that audience, how did the people get here? Did they fight their way ashore? One gentleman said, we let them in. I teased him by saying, what, you let them in? And he said, no. Eventually we pinned it down to the fact that the decisions have been made by our politicians without consultation. So very important that the priest there says that he doesn't blame the newcomers to his country, but he does point a finger at the controlling government.
Yes, and if people go to the Red Ice TV channel on YouTube and look for this coverage, which is the 13-minute highlights in English, they will hear a third segment from Father Eric Jacomin at the end, where he says, I want real multiculturalism, which is where we all respect each other's cultures and stay in our own countries. He says, well, the question is put to him, is the kind of multiculturalism we now have an affront to God? And he said, yes, of course, it was never God's will. So there's no racism in this man. He's quite clear about this. And I think one of the things I would say about this is Britain is in a better position, however bad it might seem, because we have our common law. So we can meet in forums like the British Constitution Group, and whether people have got any religious traditions or none, we still have the common law on which around which to regroup and to hold our rulers to account. Over here on the continent, we only have Napoleonic civil law. So you get this brittleness. When people think that they've been flooded by Muslims, they very quickly become ethno-nationalist and religiously bigoted. And this is, I would say, men like Father Jacomin are trying to hold back the dam of bloodshed, which is otherwise, I think, surely coming to a large swathe of continental Europe. I'm less sure about Britain, and saying, hold your fire, don't attack the Muslims, they were invited here. And so I think this is an extremely important thing to do, and a thing to bear in mind. As for Jan van Malderen's speech, which is also near the top of the queue on Red Ice, you will hear just how angry he is in the last couple of minutes of his speech when he's shouting at King Philippe. Bear in mind that King Philippe is a Saxe-Coburg. There's two branches of the Saxe-Coburgs. The cadet branch is in Belgium. The main branch, of course, is the British monarchy. And together, according to many Belgian analysts, an increasing number of British ones like Nick Collerstrom, they actually engineered both wars against Germany and the mass immigration at present. People are becoming aware of that.
Okay, thank you for that analysis. I'm just going to drop this one in very quickly because I think it's an important one. This is the Mail. Other papers picked up on it that in the States, supporters of American football teams have been burning the team's jerseys because team members have not been standing up while the American national anthem has been played. Why are they not standing up during the anthem? Because they're protesting against Trump, or they're protesting against black men in particular being shot by the police in America. But what we're really seeing is politicization of sport. And what is it doing? It's helping to inflame this nationalistic sense. So we've got trouble in America as well. You're describing what's happening in Flanders. What we've got to do, I think, as responsible media, is help people see through what is being done to create this situation. And of course, we've got to be helping people see what they can do to stop it. Truth is an important part of that, I think.
Absolutely. Right. Well, the priest speaking about the financial system and the banks, let's just have a quick look at them here, because what are they up to? Well, if you remember, the 2007-2008 banking collapse was created or caused or sparked off perhaps by the so-called CDOs, collateralized debt obligations. And of course, following that crash, these things were supposed to be really wiped off or taken off the markets and so on. But in fact, Citigroup has revived the idea of collateralized debt obligations. They're now calling them synthetic collateralized debt obligations. They claim that they're fundamentally different from those sold before the 2008 crisis. And they say that they have these synthetic CDOs structured in such a way that no one loses. Brian, is that possible? I think it's a fundamental part of the financial system that somebody has to lose, because otherwise nobody can gain.
As long as it's not in their club, of course.
Absolutely.
They prefer people to lose who are outside the club.
Absolutely. So Citibank straight, back into other banks like BNP Paribas, a whole bunch of other banks wanting to get on this bandwagon. They're just wanting to blow up this bubble once again. And then Bloomberg here saying banking rules have improved, just not enough. This is by columnist, former Financial Times columnist, Fernando Giuliano, and he's saying that there is a terrifying prospect of a collapse of the transatlantic financial system. So this is more recognition in the mainstream press from senior commentators and senior bankers that the financial system on its or at least getting to the point of getting to the brink as it was just prior to 2008. Many economists, he says, fear the financial system remains exceedingly vulnerable to shocks, and he singles out three areas. Bank capital levels. Of course, the Bank of England, as we reported yesterday, the day before, they're quite happy with bank capital levels, but now not only the Adam Smith Institute, but another commentator coming out and saying bank capital levels not anywhere close to being enough to cover the amount of leveraged debt held by the banks. The use of risk weights to cover the situation, and the fact that commercial and investment banking has not been split. So here we are, another person saying, why have we not carried out a full Glass-Steagall style split of the banks? The Bank of England, a day or two ago or a week ago, published a new article on their educational website explaining the rules of the ring fence that was brought in Britain following the 2008 crash. And this ring fence is supposed to separate investment and commercial banking activities. It has done nothing of the sort. It will do nothing of the sort. But they claim that it does. But another commentator asking why this hasn't been done properly yet.
Because it will break the party up, Mike.
Yes.
Well, let's get on to Brexit, of course. Brexit, as the UK column says, is Brexit light, which is Brexit without the exit. And here's Macron, who's suggesting that there can be some changes in the EU so that if Britain leaves, we'll be able to be back in the new streamlined EU. Interesting graphic there. I don't know whether we're celebrating Satan or that was just a flash of the camera at an inappropriate moment.
Yeah.
But what's the text got to say? Well, it's Britain could return to a multi-speed European Union once it's undergone sweeping reforms. I think
I'm not clear whether they're talking about Britain or the European Union there.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, it's a little bit ambiguous, and I think therefore it's true because but it's going to happen both sides of the line.
But can I just mention once again, David Cameron's agreement back in 2016 was about Britain's relationship with the European Union once the European Union had been reformed. So here we've got more evidence that that's exactly what's going on.
Was being played out.
Yes.
So there was a little flyer in the middle of this. It says, in a few years, if it so wishes, Britain could regain its place in the EU. So we're not out, we're in, we're out, but we could always be back in again if we do come out, which we don't think is going to happen. So we're going to put this in that, of course, how does this European system work? Well, it's not just agreements at government level. The EU's got tentacles operating in UK. And I'm going to say a big thank you to Gary from Huddersfield, who sent me a very interesting letter. He'd been out having a look around, noticed some interesting banners. This is one of them, Full Steam Ahead European Researchers Night. And that was a big banner, obviously, on the British Rail building there. So we say Brexit, what Brexit? Because the EU is still buried and at work in Britain. Here's another one of the flyers for that. European Researchers Night is back. And all of this is part of £80 billion worth of EU money, which leads on to what they call, sorry, that should be a Horizon 2020, which is funding which is from 2014 to 2020. This is all about integrating the EU into the very fabric of any society, get your young people. There's no money, but there is 80 billion in this case, and there's a bit more. This is all being done with the University of Huddersfield, and we say unless we get these EU tentacles out, we are never going to leave the European Union. Is Corbyn going to do it, Mike?
Well, I don't know, but he's certainly getting attacked at every opportunity at the moment. Labour Party conference going on at the moment, of course. And apparently there was a Labour Friends of Israel meeting held last night. Now, of course, Jeremy Corbyn, a supporter of the Palestinian cause, so he decided not to attend. He did send a statement to be read out at the event, but apparently lots of people in the audience shouting or asking, where is he? Why isn't he here? And lots of angst from the audience about the fact that he wasn't here. Right, let's move on to just a quick reminder, AV 8.1, taking place on Sunday the 8th of October, 11 to 6 p.m. in the Connaught Rooms. You'll be speaking at that.
Yeah,
do you know what you're speaking about,
I do. I'm going to be talking about thought leadership, which of course is where the policy is all coming from, which is causing the trouble in the first place. So we're back on the subject of language and the manipulation of language.
Okay, and a reminder of Frim Stop Wars event, Media on Trial, headlined by John Pilger. Details are on Eventbrite. That's on Thursday, the 19th of October. Get onto Eventbrite, get your tickets, and get along to that.
Excellent. Media on Trial. We're just going to recap here. A little while ago, a couple of days ago, we said we were fascinated by the new style of the BBC article. They were talking about the missing airmen, and we said this is almost like a docudrama, but in writing. Very weird layout, very glossy and annoying images, and you didn't know whether you were watching or reading something that was real or whether this was indeed a sort of docudrama. Now, you said that you'd be happy to comment on this a bit, Alex. Mike has picked up another one of these. I don't know whether you want to do that first. You might as well, Mike.
We'll do this first because this is about Raqqa. The city fit for no one is the title. And inside the ruined capital of Islamic State group. It's almost like a celebration of what's happened. If you go down, it's a very long article. I'm not going to show it. But what I wanted to highlight, Brian, was the organisation who is providing this facility, because the BBC has produced the text, and obviously they've located the images or taken the images themselves, BBC staff. But the platform that's being used is this. And it's all about, it's called, sorry, I do apologize, I can't, shorthand, thank you, I went out of my head. Beautifully simple storytelling, so there you go, it's all about moving images and high quality graphics and high quality images. This is a platform which undoubtedly costs a fortune because they don't publish any kind of prices on the website. If you want to find out how much it costs to use this platform, you've got to apply. And these are the types of organizations that are using that as the basis of their storytelling on their website.
Storytelling. We've gone from news and reporting to storytelling.
Absolutely. So we've got the BBC there with the body on the moor. So there's a whole range of BBC articles using this format. The Telegraph are using it, Business Insider, all the big media companies starting to look at this long form journalism and this particular style of presentation. Now, it can be impactful. There's no question about that. It can be, but my concern, Alex, with this is as we discussed the last time we talked about this, the sort of merging or the blurring of the lines between real fact put into context and sort of docudrama with some fiction being brought in to sort of spice the thing up a little bit.
Yes, Mike, I'm feeling a bit triumphant here because I think I put in the chat room when you first featured this that this was the art of storytelling, and here's the actual word being sold. Now, the reason I know this is because the Dutch are always a bit more explicit about their techniques than other countries are. And as a translator, I've come across a number of Dutch brands saying we use storytelling as our way to oversell our hyped product. For example, a plant or a particular dish in a restaurant. If you put a little inset box in a nice font, the Dutch are very susceptible to this, saying the story behind this product. It all began when Granny Smith, etc. Then people will pay a 50% premium on it. And this is the same with news. You see, the marketing aspect has come in, the Edward Bernays stuff. People will be sold a pup if you weave an elaborate story around it. So serious journalists, even 10 years ago, wouldn't be seen dead saying we are involved in storytelling. But this is, the pitch to what things to which things have reached now. And as regards the Corrie McKeag hatchet job at great length, which Brian brought on, my thoughts were that there was some code in here to imply that Mr. McKeag was feckless and really deserved what was coming to him. Sorry to say, but that's the presentation I got, and I got that from the particularly juvenile clip of him, which was embedded, which I think his wife or girlfriend shot with a mobile phone, which was him sitting in a deck chair miming along to a Disney song. It made him look fey, childish, and almost suggested that he and his girlfriend were children having children, to borrow a line from, I think, Theodore Dalrymple. So he got what was coming to him is one of the nasty implications here. Again, it's subliminal. Another, perhaps, dog whistle that only Scots would understand is by presenting them as Irish Catholics from a broken family in the east of Scotland, which is sort of out of their own environment, which is the west of Scotland. It's almost suggesting that these were like, bottom of society dregs hardly managing to cope. So there's several dog whistles in here. And particularly the cute photographs of him, which were embedded, sort of implied that he was just sorry to say, but a Satanist's dream sacrifice is the strong overtone I got, that he may even have been cultivated from a young age for very much this purpose. He went down from the east of Scotland to the east of England, and there is a particular problem throughout our east coast, from Caithness right down to Kent, with a lot of this embedded Satanism. I'm afraid it goes right back to the Norse settlement. It's a very hidden current in our history, but it's there. Some of the worst stuff that happens in the most isolated places and the worst depravity is in the east of England and the east of Scotland. And I think Corrie McKeag is almost a textbook case of how these elements come together.
Right, okay. Alex, thank you very much for that analysis. Of course, missing persons we've covered, and we're going to keep covering until we discover what the true statistics are for UK. That's it for today's news. Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you to our viewers and listeners. And again, if you're not a subscriber of UK Column and you like what we do, please subscribe and give us that financial support we need to keep producing news. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye.